The Center for Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit member organization with a mission of educating, promoting, and advocating for better RFP processes. Join CPE today and make your RFPs faster and more transparent. Membership also includes discounts to all of our training and networking events. CPE hosts a variety of virtual and in-person networking and training events throughout the year. Visit our website to get signed up. CPE Speakers Bureau is available for your regional and national meetings and professional conferences. Contact us to learn more.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
How to evaluate synergy amongst proposing teams, right? So when you think about this topic here, a couple of things come to mind. I'm trying to frame the context of what we're talking about here today is, how do you know if the proposing teams can work well together, right? That's commonly when we think about this idea of synergy and team dynamics, these are some of the things that come out here, right? How are they going to behave on our projects? And what is that extra effort worth it to look at and decide somehow if this proposing team is going to work well together, both with themselves and with us as an organization, right? So many times when we think about evaluating this concept, there's lots of words we like to use, right, to describe this or things that we might look at, right? Is the proposer's level of togetherness, right? How do they handle stress? Transparency, right? Trust, working as a team, collaboration, all these different words here. And as you look at these phrases here, folks, what should be the main idea that comes here? What do these phrases all look like? Bzz, bzz. That's right, Brian. Thank you. Exactly. These are all buzzwords. That's pretty good, Brian. That was good. Buzzwords, right? And when you think about buzzwords and thinking about why these are buzzwords, is that how do we actually evaluate that? Everybody should, if you're taking notes here, you should write this down, right? The question we should think about here is, how do you fairly and effectively evaluate a team's level of collaboration, their level, how dynamic they are? Because I guarantee you that if you're actually forced to justify that and explain to somebody, well, this team is level 10 collaborative and this team is level 8 collaborative, there's a certain word that starts with P, ends with protest, that's going to happen, which is a protest, if you didn't get that. Okay, so how is this going to work? Well, the frame when this really happens and when this really comes up to do that is we have the RFP that describes our needs, we advertise it, we evaluate the proposals, and eventually make an award and get to a contract, right? Well, within the evaluation process, there's a couple things that we think about, right? In the evaluations, there's really two main things. There's the proposals, the actual physical documents or what have you that are evaluated. So maybe this is the cost, the work plan, schedule, references, whatever. And the other part of this is interviews. This is the number one place that we see this happen, and it's really, really risky, right? Because it's interviews, it's free flowing, everybody's trying to be friends or trying to make new friends perhaps, and it can be a ripe time to look at the distance and see the ominous things that are coming down here, much like our friends Pippin and Gandalf look into Mordor for what might be happening, right? When you think about interviews and team dynamics, that's where it is. That's where your issues are going to happen, right? Now, I'm going to go through, and I have some questions for you all here about what are some examples of what this is. Now, type in the chat box, or if you want to meet yourself, do that here. But what are some good examples where we try to evaluate team dynamics or team collaboration as part of the evaluation process, right? To help us get our brain juices thinking, I have a couple ideas, but I really want to see what you've seen before you, right? The first one is to give them a fake scenario and ask them to work together as a team to solve this fake problem, right? That's the first one I came up with, right? A second one is to present different options and how they would respond to this as a team. Another question that I literally saw this in person before is, if you were a superhero, which superhero would you be and how would that help the team? I'm not exaggerating, that was an actual interview question, right? And other questions that are maybe less insane, but is more like, how did the team work together before and what were those experiences like? Now, let's be careful here. I am not saying that it's not important to think about a team and how they work together. What I am saying, however, though, is that if we're trying to evaluate that, that can be difficult, okay? Now, I'm talking here, I gave you all a lead time. Anybody else have any other crazy scenarios that you've seen for how we evaluate team dynamics? Tim has one successful project that we worked on together before, okay? Any other crazy ideas? If you come up with something, I want you to put in that chat box because we're looking for other examples here as well, right? As you think about this, and really what the challenge becomes is that essentially us as evaluators is treating this project and really the proposing team as lab rats. Let's give them this experiment. Let's have something going on here, and let's see what's going to happen, right? Now, side bit has nothing to do with the presentation, but I saw a picture of a lab rat with a ear growing on its back. And just so you know, I would not recommend you look it up. It looks insane, but that's out there too, right? Lab rats and evaluating that as a teaming perspective, it's just not a good experience, right? So when we think about the purpose of an interview and why we're actually doing that, what is the purpose of the interview? What is our fundamental purpose of why we're doing interviews, right? Now, if you've been through lots of interviews before, if you have seen the typical approach to interviews, it typically looks something like this. It's going to take forever, right? It's going to take a long time. The executives or lead salespeople or whoever are going to be involved in those interviews. And at the end of the day here, we have emotional feelings that, oh, this seems okay, but there's no sustenance behind what that is, right? So when you think about a good interview and what we're trying to get done here is to collect information on individual expertise. Just like my friend Frodo here, right? We want to know about Frodo's skills and that person's ability to deliver something good in the project, right? Focus on the individual expertise. That's why we have the interviews, right? Because you think about this, how do you put team collaborativeness, by the way, that's not a real word I found out. Collaborativeness is not a real word, into your source selection plan? You can't do it, right? How do you publicly defend that it's okay to do this and evaluate this and justify that this is a fair criteria? And the answer, in our opinion, is it's not. We can't actually do that. It's very difficult to defend that because there is no real sustenance behind that, right? So hopefully our opinion on this topic is quite clear. And if you have questions or comments out, definitely jump in here because this is a major thing to do about that, right? So this is the issues. These are the things we're concerned about. What do we actually do about it? What are some of our solutions here, right? The first one here is to train your evaluators on what not to do, right? So one thing you could do here, for example, is tell your evaluators, ye shall not use words like team was synergistic. There's really good team dynamics. They are super collaborative. They work well together as a team. I can see there's good dynamics for how they get things done. Those types of phrases should not be in their evaluation plan. So I would go to your source selection plan, call that out specifically, and also when you discuss with your evaluators, I would tell them specifically, this is what you shall not do. Thank you, Brian. You shall not pass, because if you do that, it's going to turn out really, really bad, right? It's kind of like my friend Gollum here, that if you were to do that, you're going to end up inside of Mount Mordor. And you don't want to do that, okay? So don't do it. The second thing I'd recommend here is to not waste experts' time. Made up scenarios where you have them go through and do something here it doesn't actually yield insights. It's highly inauthentic. We want to know their plan for the project and how that's actually going to turn out, right? So don't waste expert time. If you're asking somebody to talk about some made up scenario or some other situation you come up with to see, well, how do they interact together, right? We've seen examples before where we give somebody a fake project, a fake scenario, and say, okay, team, for the next 30 minutes, you all that are proposing here, solve this problem. And the evaluators will literally sit by, not say anything, and they're just going to observe and watch what they do to work through this problem. And then somehow make a justification as to what we're going to do in that situation, right? You don't want to do that. It wastes everybody's time and it doesn't give you good results here, right? Thirdly, it's just, frankly, it's a faulty notion. In a given amount of time when everybody's really, really busy, it's impossible for us as evaluators to see what they can do or to make a good judgment call on what team dynamics really are, right? It's just a waste of time and we just cannot do. There's been no studies out there that say in procurement, in evaluation, we can actually fairly and equitably evaluate what those team dynamics look like. It's really, really difficult to do. In fact, we would say impossible, right? And finally, number 4 here is to focus on the individuals involved on the project. And there's really 2 ways you can do this. There's reference checks of the key people involved, and then individual interviews. And I want to talk about a few things that are tied to this here, right? For the reference checks, the first thing, and if you've been through our CP RFP classes, one of the things we talk about is resumes. And essentially is don't do resumes because all resumes look good. It takes a lot of time for us to go through and look at that, and it's just a lot of time here, right? So if you are going to do reference checks or verification of past performance, a simple survey is probably the best way to do that, right? So the survey is sent to past clients. We ask them standardized questions, and you can get feedback. This is just a better way to do that compared to lots of other things that we would typically use, right? You could take these surveys and do this on all sorts of key people here, but what I highlight here is that just a slight branch off from our main topic here is the number of questions you ask. We, for a number of years, we worked with different organizations. At the time, when we had these past performance surveys, they were literally, not exaggerating, 80 to 90 questions that the past customers of these contractors had to fill out. And it is a huge waste of time. So we did a giant statistical analysis. We looked at all the other things, and we found out there's really only 2 or 3 questions that actually make a difference, right? So focus on the key people. When you send out surveys, don't say about company XYZ, but rather the key project manager that they've identified. Collect surveys about that one specific person. Now, switching over to interviews here, when you think about how to do an effective interview, again, think about the key people and have them individually come in and participate on the interview. And focus on questions that will help them make a clear distinction from an evaluation standpoint. And again, team dynamics, collaboration, working together, all these other things here is not going to do that, right? You want to ask questions that tell people about why they actually are going to and how they're going to deliver the project, right? Nobody's going to come in here and say, oh, we're really disappointed to be here today. I mean, no one's going to say that. This is our least important projects. Obviously, nobody's going to say that, right? Now, just for a way of fun, that when you start asking really good questions, these are some actual quotes we've seen from interviews when you do this correctly, right? I apprenticed under the greats of the industry, basically traced my lineage back to Nikola Tesla. Pretty impressive, right? I might be overcommitted by my manager because they like to put my name on resumes, on proposals. There's not a lot of me out here. I am being very honest with you, okay? Interesting. I've never managed a project this size and scope. The greatest risk I face is how to accomplish all the things our sales teams promised that we could do, okay? When you start asking better questions, things turn out much better, and that's our goal here as we go through and think about this, right? So our conclusion, main thoughts here to wrap all this together, is that the vendors have options. There's many fish in the sea, and we want to be seen as more attractive than the other owners that are out there right now. Because if we look dangerous by asking them ridiculous questions that things aren't relevant to what's actually going on here, that's really, really risky, right? So what's the client of choice? Vendors want to propose on their project. They want to send their best people to propose on their project. They put together time and effort in developing, here's the best solution to do that. If the industry is convinced that you're really willing to listen to their expertise, I guarantee it will change how you interact with the industry. And the second thing here too is that internal clients will see RFPs as a value creator to bring that innovation, to identify the best approach internally, not to see procurement as something that we have to do here, right? We were working with an agency, a person recently, and they went through, we had some discussion about procurement, and basically the approach as the conversations went with this person is that here is the rules and regulations for what you have to do. Outside of that, do whatever you want, client, right? And as we talked to this guy and we went through the procurement process, the way they saw their role here is legalistic. Here's the rules, don't go to jail, and that's all we need to do, provide here. That's like the bare minimum of what we should be doing as procurement. As procurement, our role here should be to protect the value of the public and ensure and facilitate a positive procurement experience for everybody involved on the project. And the way we do that is by making sure that when we go through procurements, we focus on things that actually make a difference here, right? So when you do this and put it all together, this is what your procurement will be like. This doesn't have relevance to my presentation, but I thought it was a nice picture. So anyways, that's what I need to focus on, right? Key points. A fair evaluation of team synergy is impossible and ripe for protest. Do not waste experts' time. Instead, focus on project-specific people. And you really, at the end of the day, you want a team of experts, but we need to focus on the individuals and what they're bringing to the table. Not on team collaboration, not on team dynamics, not on synergy. If you think something is a buzzword, there you go. It is a buzzword. Keep that in mind and don't look at that. Okay, so questions here. We're going to break out to virtual peer groups, but open the floor up to Brian or Jeff. Do they have any other supplementary comments? And with that said, go ahead, Brian.
Two supplementary comments. One is there's a couple of good discussion questions that folks posed that I want to call attention to. But before that, I was going to mention for transparency to the whole audience, Jeff from CPE challenged us to be at 10 minutes or less with our teaching moment. We didn't quite get there, but one thing that Jeff does not realize is that Jake's got his beard, and an RFP doctor is never late, is never
That's
early.
right.
We finish precisely when we mean to, Jeff.
That's exactly right, Brian. Thank you. Hopefully this presentation has inspired you all to watch Lord of the Rings or the holiday weekend. And if not, then that's okay too.
So questions that came up. Victor earlier said that you mentioned interviews, Jake. And so you could interview vendor teams as a whole. You can interview the individuals from the vendors teams. Or many groups I know also just leave it open-ended, right? And just say, come and show up for the interviews or come and do a presentation. Does anyone have thoughts on or have preferences on approaches to those types of interviews that Victor mentioned before? So interview the team as a whole, individually, some type of hybrid method. Victor, did I capture your question?
Yes, it did. And I just, hearing the discussion, I thought, doing a hybrid, I had never thought about the scenario situation where you throw them into a lab room and see what they do. That's a very ingenious idea.
Victor, you're hearing the wrong thing here, my friend. I said, don't do that. Don't do that.
No, but actually, if you think about it, where I enjoy interviewing with the same questions, the team separately, just to see how they rank professionally, individually, as a team, and as a company. And then when you get the next group in, you can really see the differences of who really shines as an expert. But I'm really intrigued with the idea of, because don't we, when we do interviews, what would you do in this situation? And you have to respond to it immediately. And also in our scope of work, we create a scenario that they respond to in writing. So why not throw something at them live?
Sure.
As a group.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear other folks' comments. I might have some thoughts about that as well, but anybody have a response or a comment to Mr. Victor there?
The trick is doing that all objectively. I don't know how you do that objectively to separate clearly one team from the other and prove it after.
Yep. Do you give them credit for correctly solving the scenario, so to speak, or you're giving them credit for how they went about it and how collaborative they were? It could be challenging, right?
But isn't correctively subjective?
Depends on the scenario. I would say I would shy away from something where you're looking for a particular correct answer, because it's not a test in that sense. But on the other hand, how do you actually, back to Tim's point, like how do you truly, in an unbiased fashion, measure the other side of it, which is collaboration or teamwork and so on and so forth?
Yeah, let's kind of take that a step further here, Brian. That's a good point. Let's say you give somebody a scenario and they go through it, and in the middle of us solving as a team, and you're watching the lab rats here work on it, they get in a giant fist fight. They all punch each other out, but at the end of the day, they give the right answer. Okay? Let's compare that to a different scenario where they don't get in a fight. They really work well together, but their solution makes zero sense. Obviously, either one of those is concerning, and now we're forced to, again, make a judgment call as to what the right answer is. And that just opens us up to protest, right? So again, the main thing I think we're trying to focus on here is the principle of making sure that we can clearly defend what we're doing. And if at the end of the day, it's really hard for us to say, well, this is why we did that. Here's the scores we give. This is clearly a team that's more better than another team. That's kind of the goal at the end of the day here. And we have found that a number of times on these collaborative type interviews, it can just be really challenging to do that, right?
Well, given that you can't do it objectively, why not use past performance as a proxy for future performance? Because you can judge past performance and you can evaluate that. And you can evaluate. So if the team has never worked, the members individually have never worked together before in the past, that's riskier than if they have worked together in the past, regardless of how the project worked out. So that's a level of risk that you can evaluate quite objectively.
Yeah, and we would agree with that. I mean, if you're going to do surveys like past performance or reference checks, I mean, that's a good way to do that, to collect some of that information. With the caveat in mind is that it's a piece of the puzzle, right? It is more objective than some of these other things here, but because it's a piece and it's talking about things in the past year, I would just probably limit how much effort we put onto that, or excuse me, how much weight we put on that. But it's certainly a better way to do things compared to some of these more subjective type of things here, Tim. So I would certainly agree with that. But again, I would recommend to minimize how much total weight we put on things like that, just because, well, if I get a bad survey as a vendor, I'll just toss it and get a different survey, right? So keep that in mind. Susie's got a question on the questionnaire in lieu of a resume. Does the agency send out the questionnaire, or do you ask the proposer to send them out and return them to the agency? Susie, that is a fantastic question. We would recommend that you have the vendors, the proposers, turn those in as part of their evaluations. Now, how do we know that? Well, we've done it both ways for many, many years. And we find that if the agency is collecting those surveys, then it becomes a huge administrative burden for procurement to go through and deal with that. And again, if you're just putting this at 5% total weight, then there's not a whole lot of risk, in our opinion, as to how that's going to happen, to have that be completed. And so, yeah, Susie, the person complete a survey, I would send them back to the proposer and not send that to the agency, right? And the reason why, again, I know they could certainly cherry pick. In fact, they will definitely cherry pick. And in our view, that's not as huge as a concern because our weight is low on there. And there's other key things that we should be thinking about as part of that evaluation process. Brian, I see you've come off mute here. Did you have a comment as well on that?
Oh, I didn't know I was off the mute, but I'll share this actually, since you mentioned it. Have a deck on that. So this is for past performance information. That's the acronym PPI you see on the slide there. That's all that it means. So past performance. The question number 4 I was going to look at is who should collect those types of surveys or references, whichever way you want to think about it. So the option number 1, right, is that you try to collect those surveys yourselves as the buyer organization. Option 2 is some other third party or gets sent back to you, or they collect their own surveys. How do they send it back to you? The challenge is that it's a lot of work. The more you volunteer to either receive those surveys or receive those references directly back from those past clients, or to even collect them yourselves. So we've done it before where the vendors will submit a list of references, then you as the client group has to go out and verify those or collect those. It's a lot of work to go through and do that. So you're going to have to confirm receipt of everything. If you've got vendors who give you past clients to send stuff in from those past clients, then it's coming in via fax, via email to how many places, and keeping track of it all. Stuff gets lost. Got to follow up, make sure. It's just a lot of work that you have to go through. And a quick case study on this. So we were helping a public organization over here on the left. We did about 4,000 past performance surveys with them across their procurements that we helped with. And then on the right-hand side, a separate group that was 8,000 surveys and across their vendor pool. And what we did is we split those based upon, I think it was the 4,000, Jake, that we had the vendors submit a reference list, and then those references sent the scores in directly to the procurement group. Whereas these other 8,000, we let the vendors collect everything themselves, send it back into us, and we compared them head to head. And what we saw, I don't even have the results in here, it looks like. The results here was that the vendor scores, when they collected them themselves, was actually lower on average than than the other way around. So we're like, wow, seems like we're getting even more honest feedback that way, and it takes us 1/10 of the effort. So maybe these slides I pulled up here on short notice weren't the best, but long story short, a few things. If you're collecting references, past performance, and you're looking for the past, I'd keep it as simple as possible because it quickly becomes an administrative nightmare and a burden. Past performance does not necessarily indicate future performance. I'd be careful about that. In the hierarchy of which criteria truly effectively differentiates the competitor's past performance is by far the least valuable. All the data backs that up. It is more objective to go back and try to count things. So there's pros and cons, but in terms of actually differentiating, it's not as valuable. So we would say watch out, weight it low accordingly, and do not make it an administrative nightmare for yourself.
Yeah. Well, Susie, fantastic questions. Thank you. So I think to wrap all this together here, just some other thoughts about this. Again, when we think about evaluation criteria and how we're engaging with our industry partners, it's important to make sure that we use criteria that if we had to stand in front of city council and everybody else in the world and to defend and justify what we're doing or what we're not going to do, we should be able to do that without losing sleep over that. And if we find ourselves scratching our heads and think about, oh shoot, why is this firm better than another one? Then that's a difficult situation to be in, right? And the other thing too is to keep what we might describe as at arm's length when you go through some of these things. If I've seen that sometimes procurement evaluators really get emotionally connected to one particular team. They feel really good, emotionally feel happy about it. It seems like a good experience. And I'm not saying those are not valid things. I mean, you should ask yourself, do I want to work with this person or team for the next 2 years or whatever? That's certainly a good thing to think about, but we have to be able to justify why this team and not that team over there. Why this person especially and not somebody else. And that's kind of the main things that we want to think about here.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.